The Sin Eater's Confessions, Chapter 1, October 27, 0223, which is military time for too damn early. To all whom this might concern. Call me Ben. Okay, it's not Ishmael or anything, but the idea is the same. Wicked and repentant. That's me. But here's the truth. I could be anyone from my town, or any soldier. People make assumptions on the basis of what they see all the time. In the airport, total strangers wander up and thank me for my service. Old guys want to shake my hand. Little kids want to know if I've killed anyone. And girls give me that look. Come on, you know the one I'm talking about. And honestly, it's a little creepy. It's like I'm Batman. What everyone sees and imagines, it's not about me. It's the uniform. And here's what they forget. The face in the mirror is the mask. Way better not to peek or ask, because that way you never have to tell and they don't have to know. They see what they want. The mask doesn't slip. Everybody's happy you haven't rocked the boat. So, I'm Ben. Right now it's dark and I'm writing this by hand. Yeah, a real live high-tech ballpoint. Because a computer's so bright, you might as well wear a sign, shoot me. I've got night vision, though, and a red pen light, and the moon is this glowing thumbnail silver. Without envy, the snow shimmers silvery white, and the night's milky with stars. Cold, too, because we're in the mountains, and my fingers are stiff. So if this is messy, you understand. I've got a thermos of mint tea, but that stuff runs right through you, and then you pee neon green in the NB. I know a Marine who does piss angles, which you'd think is sick, but isn't. I mean, this is Afghanistan, and just about as far away from Wisconsin as I could run. Anyway, reason I've started this now is because this Lance Corporal ate his gun about 2 hours ago. His buddy started bawling for a medic. Actually, he screamed, "Doc, Doc," because that's what all Marines call their medics. See, not even they really know my name. It's all about the mask. Anyway, there wasn't anything I could do except cover the mess with a blanket. The buddy was pretty freaked out. Not screaming hysterical, these are Marines after all, but he was shook. Crying, moaning, had a bad case of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. How he should have seen this coming, and then maybe he could have done something for his buddy, and then the dead dude would have gotten help. Guilt, like God, is real big over here because life is so frigging random. Things went downhill when the senior NCO arrived on scene about 30 minutes later. He's like a cartoon, a bull-necked jarhead, the kind of guy who probably picks his teeth with his K-bar. Not 5 seconds after he got there, but he started in on the oorah Marine speak, how they were tough and how to stick to the mission and blah, blah, blah. Went on about how the dead guy didn't deserve a real Marine send-off, saying as how he's burning in hellfire for deserting his unit because he ended his life in a way that wasn't God's will. Whatever that is. Guy's a real maniac. Only he kind of has a point. I'm saying sort of, okay? With all the crap you go through here, when someone checks out like this, you're upset. You're sorry the guy's dead, but you're also kind of like, dude, fail on so many levels. Then you kind of freak out because that same exit, no matter what that senior NCO says about brimstone and everlasting hellfire, eating of bullets occurred to you more than once. Because what's waiting on the other side can't be worse than the second that IED's triggered. That monstrous orange plume towering so high and bright and terrible your eyes melt if you stare too long. Only the hell of it is, you can't help but look. That tower of fire might be all that's left of the Humvee your buddy was riding. Looking away from his death would be wrong. Because someone should remember how he died. Someone should get it right. Someone. Now, this is a true fact. Everything can always get worse. In this case, it's our captain who's coming back from Kabul sometime tomorrow or the next day. Scuttlebutt is. He'll ask for, insert air quotes, volunteers for a mission into a village where we know the Taliban are strong. The volunteers will infiltrate, figure out where the bad guys are, and, try not to get shot. And did I mention that one squad already got its butt kicked, lost 2 guys last week? That's how bad this village is. Call me a pessimist, but I figure a volunteers got about a 1 in a bazillion chance of getting out alive. Trust me, this is a mega bucks lottery. You'd be better off skipping. Except I don't think that I will, which is okay. It's time I got all this down as fast as I can without too many breaks. It's when you step away from something that you can change your mind or just flat out not finish, and then we'll see. It might be like a friend once said, sometimes writing things out helps you see your path. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm not sold that writing or talking does diddly, but I'd like to believe that it might, because trust me, I need all the help I can get. I don't have all the answers to what happened back home or why people did what they did, or more to the point, why I didn't do what I should have. All I know is that I can't stand the secrets anymore. There's blood on my hands, which is ironic considering I spend my days breathing in the stink of overcooked gore and flash-fried guts. Considering that, some days, I don't have time to wash the blood from my boots before the next dust-off. Anyway, I need to tell someone what happened back in Wisconsin, because I've been looking over my shoulder these past few years, and I guess I'm getting tired. It's the weight of it. All that horror and guilt and doubt I've swallowed back, bottled up, kept deep down in the dark. Everything happened almost 3 years ago. I was just a kid, a senior in high school. I kept the secret all this time for a lot of different reasons. Mostly, I was afraid. That may sound stupid coming from someone who spends his days with bullets whip-crapping around his head as he tries to keep soldiers from bleeding to death or figures out which ones are going to die no matter what. But I was 17 and scared out of my mind. There wasn't anyone I could tell, not my mom or my friends or my little sister, and no way I could tell my dad because he'd have put me in jail. I was just a kid. The other thing is, even now, I'm not exactly sure what happened. That is, I think I know what I saw, but I was far away, it was night, and I wear glasses, only they got knocked off, and honestly, everything happened so fast. The thing is, every story has a beginning that sometimes doesn't become clear until you've made it nearly to the end. Your life story doesn't necessarily start when you're born, but maybe when you're 5 or 10, or your mother dies, or your dad runs off, or a tornado tears your house apart while you're cowering down cellar. Or maybe your story starts when you're 17, and the life you thought you were destined to lead gets derailed. Like the train you've taken to work a million years suddenly slams another head on. I think, dude, that's me. So I just broke my own rule. I stepped away mentally just for a sec, put down the paper and my pen and took a couple of minutes to look at the stars. This may sound stupid to you, but I never looked up much when I was home. I was always head down, staring at my feet, thinking about what had to get done before it was time to move on to the next assignment or essay or test. Now, I sometimes wonder if maybe the stars weren't put there on purpose, so we'd have to stop walking and tip our heads and let the mask slip so you can really see all those lights of far-off places you've decided to forget, but which have always been there. Come to think of it, I guess the stars are like memories, just waiting for you to find them again. Anyway, clock's ticking. So, the beginning. Well, that'd be where I'm from, a little town named Merritt, about 300 miles northwest of Milwaukee and an hour north of Wasau. Farm and timber country mostly. The town's about 2,000 people, so the school is pretty small, and about 500 kids altogether, and no more than 40 kids to a grade. I was pretty normal. My parents weren't divorced, they still loved each other, no one had cancer, I wasn't abused, and my little sister was a pest. I was a good student, top of my class. I worked 2 jobs. One to look good for college, and the other because it was the right thing to do, which I'll tell you about in a sec. So yeah, normal, maybe even a little boring, which I didn't have a lot of time to worry about because when you're normal, it's like the refrigerator's always full and you never have to put gas in the car. Bad things only happen to other people who deserved it. I was way too busy to think about girlfriends. I mean, I had friends, 3 guys I'd hung with since we were about 14 or so. Then I started to bear down on my studies and they got girlfriends. We still saw each other in school and they'd invite me to hang out. But I really didn't have time. I was busy. Anyway, there just wasn't anyone I was all that into. The summer before my senior year, my mom was all over me about getting my Common App essays done before school started. My mom is a surgical nurse and was really hot that I should get into some place like Yale, Cornell, Harvard. She'd lug home books from the interlibrary loan, how to write killer essays, what colleges look for, the 10 most frequent mistakes people make on their applications, what not to say if you get an interview, and blah, blah, blah. Crap like that. She was a real maniac about it. I tried not to think about not getting into Yale, my first choice from her list, although I had backup schools. How I was going to pay for school, I hoped that would sort itself out. My dad just didn't make that much as a chief deputy. There were scholarships, and I could take out loans. I just didn't want to. Starting out life after merit with a mountain of debt wasn't appealing. The real irony, I got a ton of calls from military recruiters who fell all over themselves wanting to help me put together the money in exchange for a little quid pro quo. My mom always ran interference. As soon as she saw a U.S. government flash on that caller ID, she'd give that recruiter an earful about how no son of hers was going to fight in an unjust war, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I guess the last laugh is on her. Anyway, that summer I hunkered down at the computer trying to think of all of the exciting, amazing things I'd done and coming up with a big fat 0. I hadn't composed a symphony, written a novel, discovered a comet, or gotten mauled by a grizzly and then stitched myself up before racing through the forest at night in a snowstorm with no shoes to save the grizzly from getting shot by a squad of sharpshooters. About the most exotic thing about me was being from Wisconsin. What about the emergency room? Asked my mom. This was in August, about a week before school started. She pestered me at breakfast because coffee was one of my main food groups, and she was into extortion. She held the pot over my mug, but didn't pour. Don't tell me that's not interesting. If only. Volunteering in the ER, which I'd been doing for almost 2 years by then, meant I wheeled people to x-ray, cleaned treatment rooms, and mopped up blood. Sure, I got to see a lot of things. Heart attacks, drunks, MVAs, moms who brought in their whiny little kids at midnight because the ER seemed like a fun place to hang out. I was even thinking that maybe being a doctor would be pretty cool, but I hadn't actually done anything because of liability and all that, though a surgeon let me put in a couple staples once. Well, and then there was Dell, but there was no way I'd write about him. There's really nothing. I held up my mug, hoping she'd get the hint. Honest. Mom kept the pot out of reach. That's ridiculous. What about Dell? Absolutely not, said my dad, who was into his second cup already. He'd just switched from third to first shift, which he wasn't happy about at all. Normally people like being awake when the rest of the world is, but my dad really loved being chief deputy, and he especially loved third shift when all the good stuff happened. Well, I don't know if he loved accidents, which he said were bad because, like as not, he knew the people involved. Sometimes kids my age got killed. Like Dell Lange. That past May, Dell had been on his way back from prom, his whole life ahead of him, and then boom, a head-on collision with some jerk so drunk he rolled right out of his car, not a scratch on him. I was in the ER when the EMTs came crashing through, doing CPR on something that looked more like bloody hamburger than a person. The nurses and docs swarmed all over Dell, and then my dad was there, his khaki uniform soaked purple with blood because he'd been first on the scene and done CPR. After the Langes, Dell's parents and his younger brother, Jimmy, got to the ER, the doc and my dad kind of herded them into the back. A few seconds later, Mrs. Lange started screaming, and they had to give her a couple shots and put her in a room. Dad drove me home. I was pretty shell-shocked. I didn't know Dell all that well as a person, but he was our star quarterback, good enough that he got a full ride to Minnesota, so a big deal. Anyway, on the way home, Dad mentioned that the Langes ran that dairy farm, 50 head of cattle and about 30 goats, and those animals would need milking come morning. Now, I'd never milked a cow, or a goat. But every time I blinked, I saw the EMT straddling Dell's body as the gurney clattered into the trauma room. I knew what the doctor had said that started Mrs. Lange's screaming, and I couldn't shake the image of Dell's brother, Jimmy, this skinny, sad kid standing by himself, face streaming with tears. So I told my dad, sure, I'd help with the milking. And that's what we did. My dad and me and 3 other farmers who'd heard the news and came out at dawn to help. Sure, it was hard work. I had no idea how to attach the milk cups, and I wasn't in love with filling the manure spreader, which was just about the most spectacular fun I'd had in my entire life. But helping out was the right thing to do. The look on Mr. Lange's face when he came out to the barn later that day told you that. You might think things like that don't happen except in movies, but they did in Merritt, along with a lot of other things. Anyway, helping out at the Langes was how I got to know Jimmy. Jimmy wasn't like Dell, who'd been big and handsome and athletic and popular. Jimmy was rail thin, shy, and very clumsy, as apt to get all tangled up by his own feet as anything. He was a sophomore when Dell died, but I really didn't know him. The school let Jimmy finish out the year at home on an account of school would have been up in 2 weeks anyway. I'm sure the school thought this was a kind thing to do, but if I'd been Jimmy and stuck on that farm during all that sadness, I'd have had a nervous breakdown. Mrs. Lange wasn't in any kind of shape to do much. After the funeral, where pretty much the whole town showed, she retreated to her bedroom and hardly ever came down for the first month or so after Dell died. Other people tried to help. The Langes were big into this new evangelical church in Hopkins, which was about 5 miles out of town. The first week or so, people from their church came by with casseroles and groceries and things like that, only the flow of people out to the farm gradually slowed to a trickle, then stopped. After the first 2 weeks, I and 1 other farmer were the only people still coming by every morning and evening to help with the milking. Anyway, one morning I'm biking up the Langes Drive and suddenly catch a whiff of something burning. Then I spotted black smoke churning out of a kitchen window. At the sight, my heart jammed into the back of my throat, and I thought, oh, crap. I didn't have a cell phone, which I know sounds unbelievable, but phones cost money and parents couldn't see the need. I knew that biking to a neighbor's would take too long, so I did the only thing I could think of. I pedaled up that hill, fast, thinking, gotta get everyone out of the house. My bike skidded, but I was already hopping off, sliding on gravel, and the cows, gotta get the cows, turn them loose in the heifer pasture up the hill, drive out the goats. Just then, the screen door flat banged, and Mr. Lange plunged out, hollering bloody murder, clutching his big cast iron frying pan, which was on fire. Yes, it was. I swear to God. Mr. Lange darted to the hand pump and dumped the flaming pan into the cattle trough. The water hissed and boiled as steam sizzled into the air. Mr. Lange, I huffed up. My lungs felt like they were going to burst. Mr. Lange, you okay? He didn't say anything but stood looking down into the fizzing water, his chest going like a bellows. His hair was wild, and crumbs of sleep crusted the corners of his eyes. Then he swung around, fists bunched, face about as purple as a plum. "Jimmy!" he bellowed. "Jimmy!" That's when I spotted Jimmy, still as a statue, on the kitchen stoop, this humongous red fire extinguisher in his hands. I remember how big and dark his eyes looked, like they were almost too large for his face. "You idiot!" Mr. Lange bawled at Jimmy, screaming, veins bulging, spit flying. "You stupid! Aren't things bad enough without you trying to burn down the goddamn house? What the hell?" You get the idea. I thought Mr. Lange was going to have a stroke. Me, I just stood there completely paralyzed. I mean, I was only a kid. What was I supposed to do? After another minute of Mr. Lange yelling, I heard a truck crunching up the drive, and I knew that the other farmer was there to help with the milking, and I was never so relieved. The farmer eventually got Mr. Lange calmed down and walked him out to the barn. Now, that whole time, Jimmy hadn't twitched so much as a muscle. Something about Jimmy standing there really tugged at me, the way movies about animals can get you all choked up. So I said, real casually, "So you tried cooking breakfast or what?" Lips trembling, Jimmy nodded, his flop of brown hair fanning over his eyes. Even though he was only 2 years younger than me, he looked about 10 years old. I wanted to let Dad sleep, so I tried making bacon and eggs, only I got too much grease and it caught fire. Hey, at least you knew where the extinguisher was, right? Not many people can think that fast. I don't know why, but I reached out and smoothed his hair back, like he was my little kid brother. Now, the cows were probably standing there with their legs crossed. They needed milking so bad, but I fished the frying pan out of the trough instead. The pan wasn't a total loss, but it would need a good scrub and seasoning. I said, let's go check out the damage and maybe get you all some breakfast, okay? The smoke in the kitchen cleared up once we opened a couple more windows and Jimmy lugged down a fan from his room. I pawed around the cupboards for another skillet and then I showed him how to scramble eggs, how to pour off bacon grease so you didn't get a fire, and how to use the coffee maker. After about 15 minutes, Jimmy really got into it, and then the kitchen started to smell pretty good. Maybe 10 minutes later, Mr. Lange and the farmer headed down from the barn, pushed into the kitchen, and washed up as Jimmy plunked down plates of bacon and eggs and toast and poured coffee. Then we all had breakfast. No one said much, though I caught Jimmy sneaking peeks at his dad from under his flop of brown hair, which just didn't seem to want to stay put. Finally, Mr. Lange wiped his mouth on a napkin and said, "Jimmy, you think your mom might want a tray?" Poor Jimmy. I wish you could have seen how his face brightened, all the fear and anxiety draining away. Maybe that was the closest Mr. Lange could come right then to saying he was sorry. I don't know, but Jimmy had that tray ready in no time. The other farmer said he was going back to the barn to keep on with the cows, and Mr. Lange went with him and only nodded at me on his way out. When Jimmy came back downstairs, he was grinning so much I thought his cheeks would split. We finished the dishes, and then I showed him how to scrub out the char with salt and then oil up the skillet with Crisco to set it in the oven to season so that the skillet would come out good as new, which it did. I guess you could say that I took Jimmy under my wing. The summer passed and I spent a lot of time at the Langes, not only with the milking, but helping out with barn repairs and haying and working the forklift to move the really huge bales to the barn. All jobs Dell would have done, I guess, although Mr. Lange started paying me after about a month. When I think back on it, I think he and Mrs. Lange were relieved to have someone older for Jimmy to hang with. Like Jimmy needed some sort of role model, which I kind of wondered about. Because I started to notice that things were a little strange. At first, I thought Mr. Lange was so hard on Jimmy because of Dell, who'd been everything Jimmy wasn't. But when you get right down to it, Mr. Lange knew how to be mean. Like if I was lifting something really heavy, hay bales or sacks of feed, Mr. Lange would bawl for Jimmy to do it. It wasn't like I could argue. I was just a kid, so we'd stand there, the tiny muscles in Mr. Lange's jaw working while he watched Jimmy struggle. The more Jimmy sweated, his naughty little biceps balling under his skin, the more Mr. Lange's face got that disgusted look, like he'd stepped in a cow pie and tracked it all over the house. Watching all this made me embarrassed and ashamed, like I was standing by while Mr. Lange kicked a dog, and especially because something always went wrong. A sack would break, or the manure spreader would uncouple and dump cow poop all over. Then Mr. Lange would swoop down and chew Jimmy out. What are you, some kind of baby needs his ass wiped? Or, you keep this up, you are never going to be any kind of man to be proud of. Then Mr. Lange would yell at Jimmy to clean up whatever the mess was and stomp off. Of course, I'd help Jimmy after the fact, like some kind of terrific big brother. One blazing hot August afternoon, about 3 weeks before school, we did the haying. Now, each square bale weighed about 50, 60 pounds, give or take, and had to be loaded into a wagon by hand. I did the lion's share because Jimmy just wasn't strong enough. Loading the first batch took the whole morning, though Jimmy and I worked out this system where I'd hump 10 or 12 bales into the wagon, and then Jimmy would put down the tractor in neutral, hop down, climb into the wagon to help me straighten the bales to make that first base layer. Then he'd get back into the driver's seat, creep along the field until I'd hoisted another 10 or 15 bales onto the wagon, then stop the tractor and do the whole thing over again. Did that until we had 4 rows, and then Jimmy would chug over to the barn and back into the loft where, oh joy, we got to stack those bales again. Then it was back out to the field to wash, rinse, repeat. We started at 8. By noon, I'd sweated to a grease spot. My clothes were sticky, my hands were swimming in the heavy leather gloves that I had to wear so they wouldn't get all torn up in the baling twine, and my throat was as dry as the Sahara. There was so much hay stuck to my shirt, I felt like a human pincushion, and my glasses kept sliding down my nose until I tied them around my head with some twine. We'd finished hauling and stacking one load and backed up to the wagon to offload the second batch. When we decided to take a break, I'd taken to bringing over a cooler so we could keep sandwiches and bottles of pop and Gatorade cold and not have to go into the house. To be honest, I just didn't want to give Mr. Lange a chance to get in any kind of dig. Jimmy fished out a couple bottles of orange pop, and some sandwiches while I peeled off my shirt and draped it over a rafter to dry. After guzzling our orange crush, we tore into the sandwiches, thick turkey with lettuce and tomato and mayonnaise. By the second bottle, I was feeling almost human and kind of dozy, so I took off my glasses and sprawled on some bales. The hay stuck and itched against the bare skin of my back and shoulders, but I was too tired to care and already dreading the rest of the afternoon. High above, a paper wasp droned in a heavy curtain of dusty sunlight. I pretty much passed out, which you'd think would be next to impossible lying on itchy hay, but both doors were open and a northwest breeze lifted cool air from the lake and I was dog-tired. I dreamed, too. Something confusing that involved the lazy hum of wasps and the chatter of machines whirring and clicking, like in the ER. My mind turned liquid, my consciousness rising and then sinking. And then Jimmy's voice cut through. I'm really sorry. What? I peeled back one gluey eyelid. Without my glasses, I saw a blurry Jimmy hunched on blurry bales with a blurry half bottle of pop dangling from fuzzy fingers. Sorry for what? For all this. Not just the work, but my dad. Me. It's okay. It was just something to say. To be honest, talking about Jimmy's dad made me uneasy, like I'd accidentally opened the door to the bathroom while there was somebody on the can. I floundered. Still a little sleep-addled. He's probably upset. I know. Mr. Eloquent. Give me a break, I was exhausted. Was he, so hard on you before, Dell? Oh, yeah, said Jimmy, though not as often because Dell was always around. I never realized before how much he protected me. As long as my dad had Dell, he pretty much left me alone. Now, it's like my parents haven't got anything or anyone else to focus on. Like at supper, I'll look up and they're both staring. They'll get over it. He shook his head. I know they never liked me the way they did Dell. Dell, they worshipped. If I left tomorrow, they'd be relieved. If I'd only been half awake before, now I was completely there. I knew these were secrets, things Jimmy hadn't told anyone else and maybe had barely acknowledged to himself. Knowing he trusted me gave me this funny feeling. It was kind of a rush that Jimmy saw me as the good guy, and I was proud that he could confide in me, knew I'd keep my mouth shut. At the same time, I couldn't escape this niggling sense that with secrets came responsibility, that Jimmy was laying this burden at my feet. As bad as I felt for Jimmy, I didn't need that, didn't want it. I had a life. In another year, I would be out of this town, shaking the dirt from my shoes. I couldn't afford to get bogged down. Come on, it can't be that bad. I fumbled on my glasses, and Jimmy firmed up until there was just one kid with bits of hay poking in his hair and grass seed clinging to his shirt and yellow dust rising out of the neck of his tee. Just give it time, Is it that you don't play football, or what? Oh, Dad wants me to. They'd probably let me on the team out of pity, but I'd spend the entire season on the bench. What would be the point? Although, if I got a little bloodied up, Dad would be thrilled. He'd think I was a man, that I could take it on the chin. Part of me wanted to ask Jimmy why he didn't stand up to his dad. I'd like to think that, if our roles had been reversed, I would have. Then I thought about college and those stupid essays and how my mom wasn't so different from Jimmy's dad. I loved my mom, but I was kind of burned out with her picking at me all of the time. All summer. Sure, no question. I wanted to get out of state and be a doctor. Only, was that my idea? I felt like it was, but at what point did what I want get mixed up with what my parents, and especially my mom, thought? Like, does any kid have an original idea? Think about it. What's the point of school, really? No, not to see your friends, not in the beginning anyway. When you're little, it's to tell the teacher what you know, right? Watch a bunch of little kids sometime. The way their hands shoot up and they're all squirming all over their seats and wiggling their hands and going, pick me, oh, pick me. You can see the pride they've got when they've got the right answer. This big honking grin that just gets bigger when the teacher tells them what good kids they are. But none of that is the kid's idea. Not at first. It's a way of getting an adult to tell him he's a good person. Eventually, that morphs into getting good grades. And even when you're performing for your parents, right? You want to make them happy, and that pride becomes yours, like a dog doing tricks. I didn't like where my thoughts were going. They felt, not dangerous and upsetting. Like thinking this way was the first step to really throwing a monkey wrench into the machinery of my life and gumming up the works. So I said, as much for Jimmy as me, look, Things will get better. Just give it some time. Once school starts, I'll only be here on weekends and you'll have homework and stuff, so your dad will have to hire someone on to help out. You'll be off the farm most of the day, and then your dad can worry about something else. Then I added, besides, you ever get into trouble, you can count on me. Okay, that was stupid. It was impulsive, but I said it anyway, like an idiot. The worry lines in Jimmy's face melted. Yeah? Yeah. What are friends for? And then I mussed up his hair, releasing a puff of hay dust that made us both sneeze. Man, would I live to regret all that. As we got ready to start hauling again, Jimmy said out of the blue, Dad got me this job I've been doing for the past couple months, almost as soon as the funeral was passed, down at the Cup of Joy. Ugh, I knew about the Cup of Joy, a Christian coffee house west of town run by the same pastor that preached at Jimmy's church, but you couldn't catch me dead at that place. There were stories about how after they'd gotten a crowd to listen to a Christian band, usually local talent, and most of them pretty terrible, they'd lock the doors. This kid I knew said it was kind of creepy, because the pastor would tell you how you were this miserable sinner and going to hell and needing saving. Then the pastor would ask who wanted to accept Jesus in his heart. The kid said they wouldn't unlock Cup of Joy's doors unless they saved a couple souls. Personally, I didn't believe the locking the door part because that's illegal, and I can't imagine the management would be thrilled about having to explain how a bunch of kids got crisped in a fire or something. I also wondered if coercion counted when it came to salvation. Sort of like the Salem witch trials. Confess or we'll crush you to death with these stones. Oh, and if you're a witch, then we're going to hang you. Like that's some kind of choice. What's the job? I asked Jimmy. Dishwasher, bussing tables. It's not too bad. At least I got a cell phone, so I can call for rides and stuff on the days they don't let me take the truck. Now, Jimmy was only 15, but when you grow up on a farm, driving a truck is something you learn. I think my parents figured this way, I'll come around. Come around? Yeah, to being... He faltered, got quiet. I waited a sec. Jimmy had this very weird look, and there was more than one emotion warring, no begging for its place. And I gotta tell you, this was one of those moments I still wonder about because of everything that happened later. Looking back, I now realize that Jimmy's expression was both excited and, scared excited. There's a big difference, Like there's, wow, I've got this really, really cool thing all bottled up that I'm just bursting to tell. But there's also... I have this secret. It's terrible and huge and awesome all at the same time that I am dying to let out, and only to you, because only you will understand. Only you matter. But I am also so scared because I don't really know what this means or what might happen next. If I tell, maybe everything changes, and not for the good. And I don't know if I can bear that. Being what? I asked. It was a mistake, that question. I didn't know it at the time, of course. How could I? And now it's too late. So I'll never know what he might have said, what he wished might come next, because I realize only now that maybe he'd hoped I would find the words for him, that maybe I was the other half of a story that neither of us truly understood had begun the day I slipped into his life, when I brushed hair from his eyes and showed him that not everything was ruined beyond repair. If I close my eyes now, Jimmy floats there in the dark, and I can see at this very moment what I saw then in the barn on the hay, how his face smoothed, his expression not so much clearing as rearranging itself, the jigsaw pieces of a mask snapping into place as he caught the moment, snatched it back, and shoved it deep down into his gut where no one would see, if that makes sense. Nothing. His eyes slipped away, and then he sighed, swirled the last of his pop, and tossed it back. It's nothing. We worked the rest of that day. We didn't talk, mostly because the work was hard and it was hot, but also because I knew that whatever Jimmy had wanted to say wasn't nothing. There was more to this story, but I didn't ask. The truth is, I really didn't want to know. Jimmy had his life. Whatever was going on had nothing to do with me. No way I needed to take on anyone else's problems. I had plenty. Thanks. By 4, my back was stiff, my legs all noodly from the heat, and then, oh joy, it was time to milk. My job was to clean the cow udders with an iodine solution and then wipe them with paper towels while Jimmy attached the milk cups. We had a system worked out by then that would keep me about 10 cows ahead of Jimmy. And then, while he finished with the cows already in the parlor, I returned the milked cows to their stalls and led in the next batch. Maybe halfway through milking, Jimmy said, again, out of the blue, "Do your parents, I don't know, are they after you? Like, do they want to know what you want to do after graduation?" "Sort of," I said. "Maybe if I kept my responses brief, we'd just get past this." Jimmy was quiet a sec, then said, "Like how?" "Oh, I dipped a cow's teats in iodine. You know, I had mentioned my mom in medical school and then said, only sometimes I'm not sure if medical school's really my idea." Just as soon as the words tumbled from my mouth, I wanted to scoop them back. Why I went that far, admitted that out loud to somebody else, I don't know. In a way, it was like I was picking up where Jimmy left off, only now it was me daring me to lay all my secrets in the sun where everyone could see, and me most of all. Because once again, it couldn't be unsaid. I'd hear, and I'd know, and so would someone else. So, Jimmy said, naturally enough, "What would you be if there was no one around to tell you what to want?" Now I'd put my boot into it. "Well, maybe I'd like to write." "Seriously?" "Yeah, you know, the cow I was working on had a little stamping fit and it took me a second to calm her down, but that gave me time. This was real life, don't ask, don't tell. I'd never breathed a word to anyone about my writing. By then, I'd done a couple long-winded, tortured, frankly embarrassing poems and taken several stabs at short stories, which I actually thought might not be half bad. I'd gotten this idea of taking out an anthology of Stephen King shorts and then taking the theme of each one and seeing what kind of story came to me. One story about a kid who couldn't decide if maybe his parents' spirits had gotten swapped out for aliens I was kind of proud of. The rest of my stories were crap, though, and I knew it. But why I was telling Jimmy any of this? Bad idea. "I'm honestly not sure," I said and turned it around. "What about you? I mean, you're going to college, right?" "I hope so. Maybe. It's not just the money. I don't think my dad will fill out any of the financial aid forms." "Why not?" "'Cause," Jimmy was suddenly very intent on fitting cups, "he doesn't approve." "What do you want to be, a terrorist?" "No," said Jimmy, "an artist." I did a double take. "Really? Like painting?" "Photography." "Shut up. You mean like a real photographer? Like National Geographic?" Jimmy looked both embarrassed and kind of like he was about to bust a gut. He wanted to let out this secret so much, and all of a sudden this huge wash of relief swept through me too. This sense of, so that's it. Whew, no big deal. Dodge that bullet. "Kind of," he said. "There's magazine work, and then there's portraiture and art photography. Dell got me a pretty nice little digital camera for my birthday, and I figure on saving up for a better one and some decent lenses. If I can put together a good enough portfolio, I might even win a prize or get scholarships, so it won't matter what my parents do. There's the summer program at Rhode Island School of Design, and they give out a lot of money, so yeah, maybe." Wow. I didn't know anyone the least bit artistic. So what's the problem? Photographers make money. Some of them are pretty famous. "I know. Like Annie Leibovitz. She did that awesome photo of Daniel Radcliffe. You know, Harry Potter, only he's completely naked and crouched on this black horse, and together they make something beautiful. Maybe it was the heat, but his face was flushed, a line of sweat standing on his upper lip. There's also this old guy in the photograph, except he's got all his clothes on, and so Radcliffe looks even more naked, but you also feel that there's no connection between Radcliffe and the old man. His voice got a little dreamy, his eyes fixating on something distant only he could see. It's the horse Radcliffe's in love with. For him, people aren't really there." I didn't know what to say. For a second, it was as if Jimmy had gone somewhere else where real people like me weren't invited. After a small silence, Jimmy blinked, his eyes sharpening on the here and now. "Anyway," he said, "it's really amazing." "So your folks don't want you to take pictures of naked movie stars?" I said it lightly enough, but all this talk was making me a little uncomfortable. I mean, it wasn't like I'd never been in a locker room before. Guys are always commenting, and some like to strut, but I don't think too many of them would admit if they stared. They just don't approve. Of the photographers, I guess. Some of their reputations. Jimmy rinsed pails, so I really couldn't see his face. They think those kinds of people are a bad influence. Those kinds of people? What do you take pictures of now? Landscapes mostly. He did a one-shouldered shrug. A couple candids here and there. I like candids because it's when they don't think you're looking that you catch people being themselves. Anyway, I'll probably do the yearbook and school newspaper. Some of the bands that play down at Cupboard Joy want me to do them too. You know, publicity shots. I even get paid. I do them between sets or before the bands get started. I figure this way my dad will see that it's not what he thinks. So your dad doesn't know that I'm doing this? He shook his head. He'd take away my camera. Now this sounded like a recipe for disaster. Whatever was going on had to be about more than just a kid wanting to be a photographer. And if his folks found out, things would end very badly. I could feel it. Knowing what I do now, I wish I'd pushed Jimmy harder. Then all the bad stuff that came later might not have happened, but it didn't. And a few minutes later, Mr. Lange came to bawl out Jimmy about how it was time to wash up and get ready for church, and that pretty much rescued me. I got out of there, which you'll see is kind of a recurring theme in my life. I regret that to this day. If only I could have gotten out of my own way and really talked to Jimmy, those pictures wouldn't have come out, and Jimmy never, ever would have gotten into that car. Oh, the things you realize in retrospect. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. School started. After a couple days, I didn't have time to worry much about what was going on with Jimmy. Besides, all my regular classes, I was enrolled in calculus and advanced chemistry at the university extension. My mom's idea, of course. Between all that and my regular work and the college applications that I was still finishing up, I was pretty squeezed. Jimmy and I would occasionally pass one another in the halls, but I felt like I had to make an appointment just to take a leak. So I really wasn't paying attention, you know what I'm saying? I had my life going. One thing I did notice, though, he was always toting a camera around, snapping pictures for the yearbook and school newspaper. That his parents must have approved. He also had to be earning plenty at the Cup of Joe because he had at least 2 cameras, one you could slip in your pocket and another larger Nikon, for which he had a couple lenses. We still saw one another on weekends when I'd come to do the milking twice a day, although his dad always seemed to be around. Jimmy didn't bring up his photography again, and it kept slipping my mind to ask, or maybe I decided I just didn't need more responsibilities than I already had. So I kept my mouth shut and steered clear. I was getting pretty good at that. The 3rd Saturday in September, we had a college fair. This is where different places come to convince you they're the greatest schools on earth. We do it every year, only I never saw a point to going because I already knew the only Wisconsin school I was applying to was Madison, as a safety school, and all the schools that came to the fair were either from Wisconsin or Minnesota, with the odd Michigan school thrown in for variety. I had to go that year, though, because I was president of the student council. We got there early to help the school set up in the gym and lug the boxes of pamphlets and junk they gave away to try to get you interested. T-shirts, keychains, chocolate chip cookies, bottled water with the school logo, pizza. One school even had a raffle going for an iPad, which I thought was cool. I even listened to the sales pitch just to get my name entered. Mostly, though, I went around to the different tables to make sure things were running smoothly to see if the reps needed anything. The only guys who got no traffic at all were the military recruiters, which was a little strange because this was a farm country. Like me, not every kid could afford college without a lot of help. Then, too, not everyone went to college, and no shame in that, by the way. Where do you think your food comes from? Anyway, the military was always another option for some kids, but not that year. Maybe the uniforms put people off, or more likely, Iraq, where we still had boots on the ground despite the beginnings of a withdrawal. And Afghanistan seemed endless. On the other hand, the Marines guy came in this amazing Hummer, painted red, white, and blue, with the Marines logo and a sword and things like that. A lot of parents didn't see any problem with taking pictures of their kids standing next to the Hummer. They just didn't want their kids signing up to get killed. The fair lasted from 10 until 5, and the gym was packed with students from as far away as Wasau. People didn't finish trickling out until almost 6, and then it was another hour helping the reps break everything down. The military guys took a while because they had to lug back out pretty much everything they'd brought in. I was helping the Marine guy put away pamphlets when he peered at my name tag and then grinned. "I was wondering if you'd be around," he said. I was puzzled. Sir? I called your house a couple times this summer. He stuck out his hand, one of the largest I'd seen, like a garden spade. But then again, he was also very tall, easily 6'5", a giant with a buzz cut and a navy blue pullover sweater and khaki shirt. You wouldn't think the military would want such tall guys. They'd be easy targets, know what I'm saying? Staff Sergeant Bruce Pfeiffer. Your mom's good at minding the gates. Oh, yeah, I said as we shook. Sorry about that. Don't be. Your mom's polite compared to a lot of other parents. At least she says goodbye before she hangs up. So, what are your plans? He listened as I told him about Yale and a couple of the other schools I was looking at. Wow, you've really set that bar pretty high. I was embarrassed. I don't expect to get in. To Yale, I mean. The others, I maybe have a shot. More than a shot, if your record's any indication. He must have read the surprise on my face because he added, because this school district gets federal funding, military personnel have access to your name, address, phone number. You're kidding. Isn't that spying? I guess that's one way of looking at it. I prefer to think of it as the government gives and sometimes it asks for information in return. That doesn't tell you my grades, though. No, but I'm not stupid. Honor rolls are reported in the town newspaper. You're always on the high honor roll, so I know what your grade point average has to be, approximately. He flashed another grin. The rest I gathered after your mom gave me an earful. So how are you going to pay for all that schooling? Scholarships, loans if I have to. Fair enough. I don't suppose it would be worthwhile my telling you about ROTC. I want to be a doctor. The Marines don't have a dedicated medical service. True, but the Marines get their doctors and combat medics from the Navy. What about the Naval Academy? When I shook my head, he dug underneath his blue sweater and fished out a business card from a breast pocket. Well, if you ever change your mind or want to discuss some ideas of how we might be able to help you put the money together, give me a call. Thanks. I had no desire for the card, but I didn't want to be impolite. Plus, like I said, I felt sorry for him. It must have been hard knowing that these days virtually every mother in town believed that you were out to kill her little boy. I wondered if maybe he had combat stress, and that's why they'd put him behind a recruiter's desk. But he didn't seem like the kind of guy who slept on the floor and ducked every time he came to an overpass. The card was much nicer than I expected, a cream beige with Pfeiffer's name embossed in blue and the Marine Corps symbol in gold. Tucking the card into my hip pocket, I hefted a carton of flyers and, as we started for the door, I said, "Mind if I ask you a question?" "What I'm here for." Pfeiffer hit-butted the front door and we passed under the breezeway just as the lights in the parking lot came on with an audible pop and buzz. Our vehicles, his Hummer and my truck, were the only ones still there. Shoot. What's it like being a recruiter? I mean, it's not like you're a soldier, if you know what I mean. Yeah, I do, and it's a fair question. He looked thoughtful as he thumbed the Hummer's remote and popped the back hatch. But some days, it's not too different from being a soldier. Like this time a couple years ago, I saw this woman pulled over in a breakdown lane about 5 miles out of Quantico. Her hazard lights were on, but no one was stopping. Rush hour, you know how it is. I guess everyone figured she had a cell, she'd call for help. Anyway, I pulled over, jogged back to see what's going on. Well, that woman had a belly out to here and was in hard labor. Her cell was dead, and she just couldn't drive herself anymore. So I'm pulling out my phone when this other Jeep slots in front of mine and jumps out this Marine commander. He stopped because he saw me. That was the best of the Corps right there. A Marine helping someone in distress and a brother Marine by his side. He paused. I guess that doesn't really answer your question. But I thought it did. Do you miss combat? I miss my brother Marines. They're my family. When my time's up here, I'll request a deployment. He slammed the hatch down with an emphatic bang. Killing people gives me no joy. Keeping my 2 nephews safe to enjoy their freedom does, but mostly it's knowing where I belong that matters the most. Anyway, if you ever want to belong in that world, you let me know, okay? We shook, and then he swung into his Hummer as I walked to my truck. What I noticed was he didn't pull out until I had. At first, I thought he was following me, but at the exit, I signaled left, he waved, and chugged right in that big Hummer, and I realized he'd wanted to make sure I made it out okay, which felt good. Warm, and a little upsetting too. Like, I didn't want to have that kind of feeling. I couldn't afford it. I was going to Yale and then medical school. So no, I didn't tell my mom about the conversation. It would have only upset her. But I remember all of it, even now, and especially the expression on Pfeiffer's face. proud, but also wistful and lonely, the faraway look of a caged animal, remembering what it was like to run free. At the time, though, the only thing I did was to slip Pfeiffer's card into my desk drawer, where I forgot about it. Fall was early that year. Night started coming on fast by 4:30, and the air got that knife-edge chill that cuts to the bone. By the second Saturday in October, the leaves were mostly gone. The bare branches clawed at the sky like gnarly fingers, and a small patch of pumpkins the Langes had grown glowed neon orange in a swath of setting sun. I remember that Saturday in October really well. Mr. Lange was in town. I forget why, so only Jimmy and I did the afternoon milking. I don't recall trying to start much in the way of conversation with Jimmy. I was preoccupied, I know that. The deadline for Yale was a couple weeks away, and I still hadn't the courage to press send. I couldn't figure that. Wasn't Yale what I wanted? Jimmy wasn't too talkative either. In fact, looking back on it now, I should have realized how anxious he was. He kept going to the door of the milking parlor and glancing down the driveway, then checking his watch. We were just finishing up when I heard the squall of brakes and then a furious crunch of gravel as someone took the corner onto the Langes' property too fast. Startled, I cranked my head around and saw Mr. Langes' truck tearing up the drive, slipping and slewing on all that loose stone. There was just enough light so I could see that there were two people in the truck, which wasn't right. Mr. Lange had gone into town alone. I glanced over at Jimmy. From the look on his face, I could tell. He knew what this was about. "What is it?" I asked. Jimmy didn't respond. The truck roared up the drive past the house. Mrs. Lange rushed out of the kitchen, her apron still on, a towel in her hand. "Harlan," she called. "Harlan, what is it? What's wrong? Harlan!" But that truck kept coming, the grill grinning so big and shiny it was a maw with bared teeth. Maybe 50 feet from the barn, Mr. Lange braked hard enough that the truck rocked on its suspension. Then the driver's side door popped, and Mr. Lange came rocketing out, his eyes all buggy and his face as thunderous and twisted as a gargoyle's, like something out of a nightmare. By now, the passenger door was also open, and this lanky guy in jeans and a black zip hoodie unfolded from the seat. "Harlan," he said, wheeling fast around the grill, trying to head Mr. Lange off. I recognized him from Dell's funeral. Pastor John, from their church. "Take it easy, Harlan. Take it easy." All this time, Jimmy hadn't said a word, hadn't moved. He had watched his dad come. There was something in Mr. Lange's hand that I thought was maybe a stick until he got closer, and then I saw that it was a rolled-up magazine. Mr. Lange's rage had made him bigger, more menacing, a hulk, and he loomed, blowing like a horse. For a second, it was like we were all in this frozen instant of time, like they talk about in physics class, where timelines go off in all sorts of directions. That point of decision when a different Mr. Lange spun on his heel before it was too late and went into his house, or another Pastor John grabbed Mr. Lange from behind, or a braver Mrs. Lange ran to shield her son, or another me let go of the stupid cow I was holding and stepped between Mr. Lange and Jimmy, the way hero kids always did in movies. But there was only this timeline, and I did nothing. I said nothing. The moment came, then slipped past, and the river of time quickened. Without a word, Mr. Lange clubbed Jimmy across the face. The sound the magazine made when it connected was like a jam jar exploding on concrete. Jimmy's head snapped around, and he staggered. "Liar!" The word struggled up from some animal deep in Mr. Lange's chest. Mr. Lange hit Jimmy again. And this time, Jimmy went down on his hands and knees. Mr. Lange clubbed him again, and then again, and kept going. "You liar! You think I wouldn't find out! You think I'm stupid! You think I'll let this go?" My mouth dropped open and my chest went tight like someone had cinched down a rubber band. The milk cow I held stamped her hooves and snorted and jerked her head. My mind was screaming, "Do something! Somebody do something! Somebody stop him! I'm just a kid, but you guys are adults. How can you let him do this?" But they let Mr. Lange keep on. The adults did nothing. Mrs. Lange stood on the stoop. The pastor's face was unreadable. In the silence, there was only the grumble of the truck's engine and the scattered bleats of goats and the sickening slap of that magazine on Jimmy's back and head across his face. "Mr. Lange," my voice came out as a croak, barely audible. "Mr. Lange, Mr. Lange." At the sound of my voice, the pastor stirred and glanced at me like he was coming awake, or maybe it finally dawned on him that having a witness wasn't such a hot idea. "Harlan," his hand closed around Mr. Lange's forearm. "Harlan, That's enough." At his touch, a tremor shuddered through Mr. Lange. He jerked around, and for a second I thought he might hit the pastor, but then his shoulders slumped, and he was making those raw, grunting sounds that I recognized belatedly as sobs. "Come on, Harlan," said the pastor. "That's enough now. You've corrected the boy. Let's all go in the house and sort this out." "There's nothing to sort out," Mr. Lange said, his voice so ragged and raw it sounded like it must be cutting his throat. Sweat and tears glistened on his cheek. "He's a liar. He's not my son. He's filth." Hunched on his hands and knees, Jimmy finally stood up. Blood snaked from one nostril. His chin was smeary, and his teeth were orange. He made a feeble gesture with one hand, reaching for his father's leg. Mr. Lange moved back with a little kick and left Jimmy grabbing air. "Dad," Jimmy said. "Get in the house," Mr. Lange rasped. He pulled out of the pastor's grip, stirring gravel that squealed and popped under his boots. He hurled the magazine, which flew across the yard, its pages fluttering like broken wings of a bird before it smacked into the barn. "Pick yourself out of the dirt and get out of my sight." Without another word, Jimmy did just that. The knees of his jeans were torn, and the heels of his hands were raw. Incredibly, he looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said, palming blood from his upper lip. I said get in the house." And then Mr. Lange grabbed Jimmy's shirt and whipped him around. There was a ripping sound as Jimmy's shirt tore. Mr. Lange gave his son a mighty shove. Jimmy's legs tangled, and as he went down, I had this awful moment when I thought Mr. Lange's foot would flash out and kick Jimmy like a dog. "Get up." Mr. Lange's fists clenched, relaxed, clenched again. "Get up, go on, get up and get out of my sight." Jimmy did, but slowly, like an old man. When he reached the kitchen stoop, I think Mrs. Lange said something to him, but I wasn't sure, and Jimmy never stopped. Shuffling past, he pulled open the screen door on a squall of hinges and disappeared into the house. "And you," Mr. Lange rounded, his mouth working as if the word tasted bad. "Put that cow in her stall and don't come back here. Ever." I wasn't sure I heard right. "Sir?" "You heard me. You are not welcome here. Don't ever show your face on my farm again. You understand me?" Well, I heard the words, but it was like Mr. Lange was suddenly speaking Swahili. Confused, I looked at the pastor, who returned my look with an expressionless gaze. And you know what's weird? I remember that there was a word printed on the front of that black hoodie. "Fallen," it said. Funny how I remember that. I wet my lips. "Mr. Lange, what's wrong? What about the—" "Don't." Mr. Lange cocked his finger like a kid with an imaginary gun. "Don't play innocent with me. Get out. Don't show your face around here again. And don't ever let me catch you with my son." Then he stalked over to the barn, swiped up the magazine, and followed Jimmy. The pastor trailed behind. Mrs. Lange was nowhere to be seen. So I did what Mr. Lange said. I put that cow away in her stall, and then I hopped on my bicycle and pedaled faster than I could for home, where things only got worse. It was dark by the time I made it home, but in the glow of an outdoor spot, I saw my sister, Mallory, waiting at the head of the driveway. She was so revved she was bouncing on her toes, like she couldn't hold it for one more second. "Oh my God, Ben," she cried. "Oh my God, have you seen it yet?" I leaned my bike against the far wall of the garage. My shirt was clammy with sweat and stuck to my back. "Seen what?" "In the kitchen. Mom's got it. This is so cool." "I don't know what you're talking about." Sometimes Mal made, no sense. "What's so cool?" "Oh my God, you don't know?" Mal's hand clapped her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were white as saucers. She dogged my heels as I pushed into the kitchen. "Just wait until you see." "See what?" I asked. "Oh, Ben!" Mom was still in her scrubs, and she sat at the kitchen table, a magazine spread before her. "Oh, honey, I'm so proud." "He doesn't know," Mallory blurted before I could get one word out of my mouth. "He doesn't have any idea." "Know what?" I was pretty irritated by now. "What are you guys talking about?" This, beaming, Mom turned the magazine so I could see. "Isn't it wonderful?" I will remember that moment in that kitchen by her chair for as long as I live. It was then that I saw, for the first time, what had so infuriated Mr. Lange that he would beat his son bloody and banish me. And yet, this very same thing pleased my mother to no end, and so tickled my sister that she was fit to bust a gut. It was the moment, the instant, that everything changed. First, there was the headline. or whatever you call it in a magazine, all black caps. Emerging artists, 10 photographers of the future. My gaze scraped over the rest of the page, enough to figure out that some famous New York museum had run a youth photography contest and was announcing the winners. Jimmy Lange's entries were on the 3rd and 4th pages. That was because he hadn't won first place, but he had come in second. And that should have been cool, and was, until I got a good long look at the pictures Jimmy had seen fit to put right out there in the open. You know how you read about all the blood draining out of people's faces? I felt that happen. All the feeling and warmth flowing from my head and pooling in my toes. The room wavered. Mal, sudden concern in her voice. Wow, you don't look so good. Honey, are you all right? Come here. Mom pulled out a chair. Sit down. I did what she said. My hand shook as I dragged off my glasses, closed my eyes. My head had gone airy and my stomach fisted. In another moment, I thought I might be sick all over those beautiful pictures in that stupid magazine. I like candids. That's what Jimmy had said. Because it's when they don't think you're looking that you catch people being themselves. Well, Jimmy had caught me.